Hey guys, today we'll talk about top 5 Space Marine units that I recommend to avoid. You want to make the best out of your roster and you want to play competitively. Not necessarily every one of these is a bad unit that you cannot use in your games, but there is a reason for each one of these why I want you to be careful around them. So without further ado, let's dive right in. I really want to stress that point. Just because I say that one of these units is something that I'll recommend to avoid, there will be a particular reason why for each and every one. It doesn't mean that there is no way to use them efficiently in the book or for any chapter whatsoever. And second, if you really like those units, remember, a rule of cool always wins. That aside, let's talk about my number 5, which are the Sternguard Veterans. I think these guys still struggle with the aura of a good unit that they have since the Space Marine Index times, where they had like a 15-second window where they were really good. It was because the Deathwatch in the Index had a very cool stratagem, which, well, it was cool for people who played Sternguard Vets, which allowed them to get anti-infantry 2+ on their bolters, and that meant that their devastating wounds bolters could essentially do mortal wounds to infantry units on 2s, and that was fixed almost immediately. I don't remember many cases where GW wanted to nerf something that much, because I guess Deathwatch just cannot be powerful even for 15 seconds. This was not a thing ever since. So now essentially their problem is we don't have the full rerolls to wound that we used to have in the Index for their bolters. We don't have the double shoot ability that they used to have. They could once per battle, if they kill the unit, shoot again, which meant that for a relatively cheap unit, they now cost 180 points for 10s, which is 18 points per model. Essentially, you could get quite a lot of output for one turn, and that was useful. Now they don't have that. They have reroll ones to wound against the Oath target, which that is not going to change the situation that dramatically, because essentially what Sternguard Veterans are is intercessors on steroids, or just intercessors with fancy bolters. The fanciness of those bolters is just the fact that they are still 2 shots for 1/1, which is strength 4 AP 1 damage 1, but they gain rapid fire 1 and they have devastating wounds. But 2 shots each, well, maybe you'll be within 12 inches, it's going to become 3 shots. And devastating wounds, which you will have, let's say you have 30 shots and you hit, well, you should hit 20 of them, and you'll probably roll like 3 6s in the whole sequence, maybe 4. So how much did you really get from that is a big question, and without some way to buff that, like rerolls to wound or anti-infantry rule, anti-something rule, even if it's anti-5+, it's really hard to see why or how would you use these guys, because the idea of them is really actually very cool. They're supposed to be, from the lore standpoint, as far as I understand, these sort of multi-role specialists that can do pretty well against numerous targets, and unlike Vanguard Vets, which do the same thing but in melee, these guys engage at range, so in shooting. But the way that GW implemented that in this iteration of Sternguard Vets, which they used to be able to pick up a whole bunch of special weapons and heavy weapons, and they were just like devastators, but with less heavy guns and more special guns like plasma guns and melta guns. Now you don't have that. You have either an option of the bolt gun I mentioned or the combi weapon, which is essentially the same thing, just slightly different. You do get 1 per 5 extra cool heavy bolter or extra cool heavy flamer, which the heavy flamer just gets 1 more shot, and like strength 6 heavy bolter gets devastating wounds, which again, that's all nice and interesting, but it does not really give us much in terms of where are we supposed to use these guys. We know we need anti-tank, we know we need anti-horde, we want universal damage units, which some units in the game they are that, so they can do really well against most targets. We want chaff, like, I don't know, scouts and henchmen, skirmish units like the jump back intercessors. But what are these guys? I sincerely don't know what they're supposed to do. I think what GW should have done with them is made them a bit more expensive, and maybe you would agree with me, and given them more stuff to do. So they should be able to switch between, I don't know, ammunition, something like Deathwatch-esque, so they can either get 5+ anti-5+ for, I don't know, vehicles and things. So essentially a 10-man unit does, instead of doing like 3 or 4 wounds to a tank, it can do 6-7 wounds to a tank, which would be a bit more interesting. And then maybe running a couple of these units could be a good idea. Plus, most leaders that you can join to these guys, they don't really benefit them that much, which again is quite sad. Most Space Marine characters, they mostly benefit the units that do stuff in melee, not in shooting. Though, yeah, you could join Lieutenant or Captain with them. Captain would give them a free CP, which there are very few stratagems that could actually benefit their shooting. Or the Lieutenant would give lethal hits, which would counteract the devastating ones. I wanted to get the word out because a lot of people have these from the Leviathan box, and just if you're really trying to use them somehow, at least I don't really see a way for you to do that currently efficiently. As always, I want to remind you about my Patreon 40k coaching service. If you're looking for help building your competitive rosters, preparing you for tournaments, or have any questions about your collection in general, check out the links for my Patreon in the description. Thank you. Next are Heavy Intercessors. So as battle line, they are inherently more interesting because they have that keyword, so they get benefits from the Pariah Nexus rules, and also they have OC2. That really does help when you need to contest objectives. So on the surface, the Heavy Intercessors aren't bad. They're far from being bad. For 100 points, you get 3 wound models. Very impressive already. And they have toughness 6, so, well, the anti-infantry guns would wound them on 5s, just like they would wound on 5s the toughness 5 Marines, but sometimes you do get a benefit from the T6, especially if you get attacked by something like, I don't know, Grey Knight Terminators with their damage 2 and strength 6 halberds, which would just carve through any normal intercessors, but they would struggle a bit with the heavy ones. They also have a special rule which gives them save 2+, well, +1 to the save, which would be a 2+ save, against damage 1 attacks when they are on an objective. And they also shoot slightly better than the normal intercessors that cost 80 points compared to 100 for these guys. My problem with them is that you really need to know why you want to use them, because I've seen a lot of players, especially beginners, where they essentially just like how the Heavy Intercessors look. They see that their armor is bigger and chunkier, and they think durability equals good, and they just try to add them to their lists thinking that, well, I'm gonna have durable units means that I'm gonna have better luck keeping objectives to myself, meaning that I'm gonna win more games, which that kind of does make sense, but it does not always translate into real life, well, real life on the tabletop. And that is precisely what I don't like about the Heavy Intercessors. You get a chunky infantry squad that eats up significantly more points than 75 that the Assault Intercessors cost, or 65 that Scout Squad costs, but you don't really get much back because they would still not do damage. They are more durable, but how much does that durability matter if you keep your squads behind ruins and they just do an action every turn and they never really are engaged by your opponent? But if you put them on an objective out in the open, thinking, well, they are durable, they're supposed to live through that, they will not. They will still die, and the reason being they don't have really good protection against anti-elite shooting, because anything that kills Terminators relatively efficiently, bringing them down to their 4+ invulnerable save, will just go through these guys absolutely easily. They don't have 2+ save, because +1 only works against damage 1, and they don't have invulnerable save. So as soon as they start rolling like 5s and 6s for their saves, they're gone. And unlike normal intercessors, which are 20 points cheaper and would at least sticky the objectives they died on, or the assault intercessors that are a real melee threat, and the Heavy Intercessors don't even get a power weapon or power fist on the Sergeant, which is something I complained numerous times on the channel, these guys will just disappear, and yeah, that would be an all. So yeah, I think there is probably a way. In some rosters there is a very particular niche where you need this just extra level of durability on this particular battle line unit, and there is a very good reason why you need that. Yes, for this particular application, I think the Heavy Intercessors could be a pretty good choice, but for most cases, you're better off buying either Scouts, the normal intercessors or the assault intercessors, or if you really want to spend 100 points for a 5-man infantry squad, buy infiltrators, because for the same 100 points you get 6 up fill no pain, which will sometimes protect them. You will get, most importantly, the 12-inch aura of no deep strike, which has a real life game value and will really help even if you put them on your home objective and they just stay there. For your opponent to take away your home objective is going to be really difficult, almost impossible to do in one go. Next is Repulsor Executioner. So I've talked about this one in my video on weird Space Marine units, top 5 weird Space Marine units, and how to make them work. And I still stand by my words. What I said there is essentially Repulsor Executioner only works in the Iron Storm detachment, and here's why. Well, first, my problem with this one is that it did not get the 7 seats treatment that the Impulsor got. So even though they both started at 6 seats for normal Space Marine bodies, the Executioner still has 6, even though Impulsor has now 7, and that is annoying, and it's sort of brings down the versatility of it. But anyways, the main issue for the Executioner is the lack of the firepower, which it's supposed to be mostly a tank, and it does cost quite a lot, 220 points, and it has inferior transport capacity compared to the Repulsor, which is the normal version of it, and decreased survivability plus threat projection compared to Land Raider, because you don't get 2+ save, which you have on the Land Raider, and you obviously don't get assault ramp, so you cannot move the transport, then disembark, then charge. So essentially, Executioner tries to be everything at once and fails at everything. It's not really a great tank, it's not really a good transport, and it's not that survivable for the price of 220 points, because there's a big difference being that survivable at 180 that the Repulsor costs, and it still has quite substantial shooting output plus a lot of capacity to actually provide you with tactical versatility in the game. Being this durable when you're at 220 points. The main gun isn't bad. It's 2 shots, a strength 16, AP 4, and damage D6 plus 4, but the lack of rerolls is what gets it, essentially. That's why in the Iron Storm, at least you have a chance to be relatively efficient with the Executioner, and I can see an argument for running a couple of these, but only in the Iron Storm, and still I'm worried about it being slightly less efficient, let's just say, than the Gladiators or Vindicators or a bunch of other really good Space Marine vehicles. They could at least have given him a cut down version of what the Lancer has. So for example, Lancer has reroll 1 hit roll, 1 wound roll, and 1 damage roll. This guy could have just reroll 1 hit roll or 1 wound roll. So significantly less powerful than the Lancer ability, because Lancer doesn't have the transport capacity. It's not trying to be multiple things at once, so it's supposed to be more efficient at what it does, but at least give the an Executioner a chance. I think a lot of people have these from 8th and 9th edition, where they were pretty good at different points in time, especially in 8th edition. They were really, really powerful. So I think that a lot of people are now thinking of maybe using these, so I wanted to let you know my opinion about them. Now, Eliminators. So actually some of my favorite units in Modern Warhammer. I've been really waiting for them to appear, and they, I think, were released in, if I remember correctly, in 8th edition, but they've fallen off in efficiency compared to what they were before, and they really lost their way, in my opinion. Firstly, their sniper role is a bit exaggerated, because they cannot snipe lone ops, and that's essentially the biggest thing that we really want to do, because the characters inside units, they hide by their nature, because they are inside a unit and that unit doesn't want to get shot, so it stays behind the ruin until time is right for it to pop out, whatever it is, shooting, melee, doesn't matter. So when you can already see the leader of the squad, sometimes it's already too late to really be efficient at removing it, where the lone ops are often used as this sort of, here's a cheap guy on an objective, you cannot shoot it because you're too far, deal with it. And that's where having snipers would be useful, as I think they are supposed to be, and that is shown in the fact that the GW have given the Vindicator Assassin the ability to snipe the lone op characters, which I think they understand this same thing that I've just mentioned. Their big rule is that they get devastating wounds if they stay stationary, and you know what I think about those stay stationary rules in 10th edition, where everything is based around how well you can move. And it's very annoying that that's what the rule is, because essentially it means that we're not going to be using it almost ever. After all, they are expensive intercessors. They cost 85 points per squad of 3, and with stealth being their only defense, there's really no way for us to just put them, and they have the infiltrator's ability, so we could theoretically put them like on the top of a ruin somewhere in the middle of the board and have relatively good line of sight to a bunch of different areas of the board. Problem is, they'll just die there. So using them as we did back in 9th edition, when I like to set up 3 squads of 3 on top of ruins, and just with the permanent armor of contempt and 2+ save in cover, they could get essentially a 0+ save easily. And what I mean by 2+2 save is they used to get +1 as all normal models get in cover, but they also, because of Chemicloaks, they got extra +1 to their save, and it means that with 0+ armor, AP -3, like a last cannon, used to bring them only to 3+ save. So anything that is AP -2 or lower just did not really shift them from 2+ save. That gave them some really annoying durability, which could be stacked with some other rules from like chapter tactics and things like that, and made them really annoying to deal with. Now the Eliminators are not that. They are not this survivable, so the only other efficient way, well, relatively, to use them would be to sacrifice one of the rifles or last fusils to get the carabine on the sergeant, and use that to shoot jump, which is the rule that you unlock if the sergeant has that carabine. But problem is that then you have decreased their strength, overall strength of the unit, and that means that it's very unlikely that they will be able to go through a character. That's why some people try to do tricky stuff with them, like using them in impulsors, which you could technically put 2 squads of these into an impulsor, and there's still now space for another, like a lone-up character or something like that. But they used to exploit the fact that the rules as written, I think it was like this, you used to get all of the shots from, say, last fusils on the squad from the impulsor, and then you could disembark the Eliminators, and because the impulsor did count as if it was equipped with those last fusils, so it was not technically the Eliminator shooting, they could then disembark and shoot again, which made them, well, significantly more efficient. They fixed that now, and now I don't think running them in impulsor is any good. Overall, it's unclear what their role is, and I really hope it will become apparent at some time in the future, because as I said, I love the models. They're very cool, and it's pretty much a great archetype anyways. A 3-man squad of Space Marines with long-range guns and some defensive potential with their Chemicloaks. It's very easy for them to become very good, and I think somewhere in the future they will be good again. But for now, I would worry about adding them in the list over, say, a squad of Jumpback Intercessors. Lastly, the Ballistus Dreadnought. I don't know, maybe it's just me being angry at GW for killing all of my cute baby dreadnoughts that I loved so much, and I painted a huge amount of them, and now Ironclad is dead, Death Company Dread is dead, the Grey Knight Dreadnought is soon to be dead, I'm sure, when the new Codex drops. Librarian Dreadnought is dead. The only good ones that are still available are the Space Wolves ones, which I'm glad the Space Wolves Codex is not on the horizon, because at least I'll have some time to use them on the channel and in tournaments, but I'm really worried about their future as well. And maybe that's why I don't really like the idea of GW just pushing their new, bigger equals better dreadnoughts onto us, and I never really understood the Ballistus. And my main problem tactically with him is that for 20 more points you get essentially a Gladiator Lancer, which is much better at doing the thing that Ballistus is trying to do, which is anti-tank, anti-monster shooting. So you get rerolls to hit on the Ballistus against the targets that are not below half strength, And that's a cool rule. It's useful. It gives you freedom from oath of moment, and that is what you want your anti-tank shooting to have, because you want the oath to be used by, for example, your melee units. But Lancer gets essentially 4 rerolls to hit, wound, and damage, because yeah, you get only 1 reroll to hit, 1 to wound, 1 damage, but with just 2 shots using those rerolls, it's very likely that you are not going to miss both or fail to wound with both. Very likely you will fail to wound with 1, and that's why for most intents and purposes it's just like having 4 rerolls to hit, wound, and damage. Ballistus also has 2+ armor save, which I'll admit it's a significant advantage compared to the Lancer, but considering Lancer has such a great advantage in range and will stay very far from enemy guns, it will help to somewhat shift that advantage closer to being neutral for the Lancer. If at least the Ballistus had some gun options, and that's another thing I don't like about the Ballistus. I understand that it's an easy to build model, as I think I understand that it was released in Leviathan and that's why it doesn't have gun options available, but I think it's a very lousy approach to model making for this particular model, because we used to get a bunch of gun options on our small dreadnoughts like plasma, las cannons, you could have missile launcher, you could have the assault cannon, etc., multi-melta. Now you only get las cannon and missile launcher and no options whatsoever. It's boring, and I don't like that. I hope they will release some sort of upgrade for this guy, maybe sometime in the future, where you would get other options. Like with the Redemptor, we used to only have the assault cannon option, the Gatling cannon option, but they quickly released the multi-gun version with the plasma that we are all using now. All in all, I don't think this guy can compete with the Lancer for what it costs and what we want it to do. And because it's a new model, and I think a lot of players, again, because of Leviathan and just because it's a cool new model and it does look pretty interesting, they might end up buying it from eBay or just a box and become dissatisfied with its performance on the tabletop. I've personally seen a lot of people on my Patreon talking about bringing Ballistas and using it, and it can be a pretty good thing to shoot. If the Lancer did not exist, I'll probably even be recommending Ballistus, because it is probably the second best platform, well, maybe third if you count for Vindicator, you could use, considering that it's relatively cheap and has relatively good durability for what it does. But with the Lancer available, again, don't see the point. So let me know what you think about my top 5 units to avoid. Are you using any of these units? And if you do, why do you use them? And what is that makes you want to add them to your list time and time again? Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.